In 2005, my dad was telling us what he had just been told by one of the friends of the family. He had been asked if he had heard anything about concentration camps being built here in America. Of course, he was ignorant about this subject, but it rang a bell with me. Several years prior, while surfing the internet, I had ran across the very same story, but I never questioned it any further. So, the first chance I got, I did a search for it, and sure enough, people were telling their stories of how the government was converting our military bases into these type of camps, and reopening the ones from World War II that held Japanese prisoners. Another story was told of a couple that was taking a walk along these train tracks and came upon these abandoned cattle car-looking trains. One of them had a peek inside, and to their horror, a guillotine was mounted at the front of each car, and it scared them away. Another story that kind of discredits the whole subject is when some people stumbled upon what they thought was a concentration camp, only to find out it was a landfill, and that the chain-linked fences were there to keep the garbage from blowing out. After this, I never did any more serious research on the subject. In 2006, since radical Islam was dominating the media, I wanted to know the difference between that religion and Christianity, so I decided to do some research on the two. And also, what was all this talk about aliens that has been played constantly on network television and in Hollywood movies? After coming across some very unusual websites, I stumbled upon one that was Christian-oriented. It was very strange for me being there, because I wanted to stay away from organized religion of every kind, but this site talked about it all, including the alien agenda, and had lots of audio speeches available to download. Each one was about 2 hours long. This person was talking about stuff that I never heard before. The next day, I listened to a second speech, and afterward, I went to bed, and then, I had another disturbing dream. Dream 2, March the 6th, 2006. In this dream, I vividly remember being lured and loaded, along with other people on military vehicles, by what I think was the National Guard, to a McDonald's restaurant parking lot, here in my hometown. These soldiers were not hostile in any way. In fact, they were friendly. That is why I think they were just National Guard, because full-blown military people to me would be more hostile than what these soldiers were. The civilians, including myself, were not retaliating in any way. For some odd reason, we all knew, including the men in the National Guard, what was really happening, and to be at this certain location and not to resist. I remember going into the restroom and running into one of my childhood friends, and then coming back outside and seeing a small satellite dish, like the ones used for television. I remember seeing some people propped up against the guardrail. The guardsmen were just sitting around, very peaceful. I see children playing in a grassy area. One was rolling out a garden hose to play in a sprinkler system, and 2 young black girls that spoke a foreign language were also there. I noticed a guardsman holding a box of some kind. Then suddenly, a transmission was being received on his radio. And then from then on, everything seemed to be transmitted to me telepathically. A command had been sent to them from some headquarters somewhere. I'm thinking it was from another country, asking the guards if they had everyone in place. They were instructed to send the coordinates of our location to them, and then to my horror, I knew exactly what was about to happen. I remember looking up at the sky and waiting for whatever it was to become visible, then looking around and seeing the peaceful look on the face of the guardsman and thinking that he knew the reason we were all there, that he and his comrades were going to perish, just like the rest of us. I look around thinking, what about the children that were still playing peacefully? I then looked back up at the sky, and something started to appear. It was a missile. I gathered telepathically, there were 2 of them. The first one was to hit nearby, in a certain location, and it was going into that direction. The missile automatically checked its coordinates by beaming a laser in the direction that it was going. I now see the second missile coming in our direction. I see it travel through the clouds by spreading them apart, like the space shuttle does coming through the atmosphere on re-entry. I remember thinking, is this going to hurt? And then again, looking around at the children still playing, I start to think, I didn't even get to say goodbye to my family. And then I hear a voice in my head say, pray, and then you will. I then say, but I don't know how to pray. I then wake up crying, and immediately go downstairs to tell my family what had just happened. I told a sister-in-law about the dream. She was surprised to hear what I was telling her, because she said she also had a dream recently that seemed to be connected with mine, or picked up where it left off. Her dream was about her taking her kids to school, and sometime during the day, these same type of National Guardsmen were loading the kids on buses and then taking them somewhere, and when she went back to pick them up, they were nowhere to be found. A friend of mine suggested that maybe the speeches that I was listening to were leaving subliminal messages in my mind, but the material had nothing to do with this dream. It was during this same time I came across this article called Fluoride and the Atomic Bomb, a bedtime story. A couple of days later, I was in the kitchen and I noticed a case of infant water that had just been brought in. What got my attention was that it said at the top of each jug, fluoride added. And I thought, why would they put fluoride in infants' water when they don't have teeth yet? I was then stricken with fear and then realized what was happening. It was only then I figured out that I was being poisoned by the fluoride that was in the tap water I was drinking and in the toothpaste that I was using. Before the dream about water, in 2002, I had just stopped drinking the addicting Mountain Dew and switched to strictly water. It was also around this period that I started to feel useless and drugged out all of the time. My subconscious then was trying to tell me what was happening through a dream, but I didn't make the connection because of my ignorance at the time. Since the missile dream in 2006, I would sat constantly for 12 to 15 hours a day, researching things that people were saying in articles, documentaries, and in audio speeches from the internet. I was hungry for knowledge, and one of the things that I kept seeing over and over again, it's all part of the New World Order. In one particular speech from the religious site, I kept hearing the word chemtrails being mentioned several times, and I remembered seeing it on Google Earth, where a person had left a place mark showing it going across the sky, but still, I had no idea what they were talking about. Until one evening after dark, my mother and I were out in the yard, and we kept seeing these flashing lights in the sky, and we both wondered, why was there so many of them? The next day, I looked out of the window and kept seeing these jets go over, that was spraying something. I kept watching, and it was jet after jet, so I grabbed my video camera, and for a solid week, day in and day out, I filmed the activity. It seemed like after this, a veil had been lifted from my eyes, and I knew from then on that something covert was going on, and I no longer lived in the same world that I once did.